everyone, my name is Leanne and today I'm bringing you the next episode in my Rainbow series, which is basically a series where I just select a colour and then I pick 5 books off my shelves that are that colour and use that as an excuse to talk to you about those books. It's a way of me talking about some books that I don't talk about on the channel all that regularly, and a way of me making use of having these beautiful shelves behind me. I don't always have these shelves, although I have been here for quite a while now. If you don't know, maybe you're new to the channel, I am currently at my mother's house. I came back here because of, you know, COVID and have been here for a much longer amount of time than I expected to, but I am trying to get the ball rolling with going back to London. And normally when I've been, you know, living away from my mother's house, I would only have my TBR books with me. So having all of my read books is something that I'm not gonna have once I do move back to London. So I don't know how much longer this series is gonna go on for. I'm definitely gonna do a couple of more episodes after this one, but to be honest, we're also running out of colours. But anyways, today I'm gonna be talking about 5 purple books that are on my shelves. This was actually really difficult. I really struggled to find enough books to talk about. There have been some colours, I think particularly yellow really stands out to me, where I had loads of books that were yellow that I could have spoken about, but I had slightly slimmer pickings this time around. The first book I'm going to talk about is a young adult novel, and that is Starfish by Akemi Dawn Bowman. In this book we are following Kiko, who is getting ready to go off to university, and she really wants to pursue a career in art, but she really wants to go to this one particular school, and then she unfortunately doesn't get in, and this is a really big blow for her. Kiko also has a lot of difficulties at home, so she is half Japanese and she is living with her white mother, who just really doesn't understand what that experience is like for her. And also Kiko's abusive uncle ends up moving back into the home, so Kiko just feels like she needs to get out of there. So when she receives an invitation from a childhood friend to go and tour art schools, Kiko jumps at this opportunity, but there are some difficulties for her along the way, particularly things to do with her anxiety, and I thought the depiction of that mental health struggle was done really fantastically. The romance that is in this book I thought was done really brilliantly too, and it's a book that's ultimately about learning to embrace yourself. It's about family and difficult families. It's about what it's like to have a hyphenated identity. And yeah, I thought this book was absolutely brilliant. Let's stay on the YA while we're here. I have Sleigh by Brittany Morris, which has quite a lot of pink, but also quite a lot of purple on it. So this book is about 17-year-old Kira, who is one of the only black kids at her school. And much of this book is about the difficulties that she has to deal with because of that experience. In addition to this, Kira is also a game developer, and she has created this massive online role-playing game called Sleigh. And the idea behind this game is that it is for black players only. One day a teenager is murdered over a dispute that happens in this game, so he's murdered in real life, and this catapults the game into a huge amount of media attention, and so many people start labeling this game as being a place for thugs, which of course is a very loaded word, a place that is glorifying violence and is exclusionary. They're calling it racist because it's only for black people, and Kira is dealing with all of this when no one knows that she is the person who developed the game, not even her boyfriend. This is a book that really took me by surprise because I am not someone who has any interest in gaming or any of those things, but I thought this book was brilliant, and there were a lot of nuanced discussions around the game, around Kira's experiences, not just in school but all of the experiences around the game. I actually don't know if this author has written anything else. I'm going to Google it after I film this video because I would be really intrigued to see what else she has written because I enjoyed this so much. Next on this list is a book of non-fiction, and that is Testosterone Rex by Cordelia Fine. I think we've got just enough purple on this that it can justify it being in this list. So Cordelia Fine is a psychologist, and in this book she is exploring the ideas behind the gendered brain. So whether there are particular things that are different between men's brains and women's brains. Is there something to do with hormones, particularly testosterone, that means that men and women just think differently? That men and women just naturally have different attributes and different strengths? And essentially throughout this book, Cordelia Fine is dismantling all of those ideas. She is looking at psychology, she's looking at evolutionary science, she is looking at social history, she is looking at neuroscience, and she's really picking apart a lot of studies that have suggested that there are some kind of fundamental differences between a man's brain and a woman's brain, and she's unpacking the issues in those studies, why they were not rigorously researched. And while she's talking about really complicated things, I am not someone that has a science background, I don't know anything about neuroscience. She's able to break it down in a way that made complete sense to me. And while she is talking about really in-depth scientific things, she also does it with a real sense of humor where her voice shines out. Despite this being a research-heavy scientific book, it was actually something that I read in one sitting. I read it on a train journey when I was going to go stay with my friend Vic, and I love reading books on trains. I just miss that so much. It's such a like random thing to miss, but I loved being in a, you know, pretty confined space and just being able to read for however many hours. I really miss that. I also have a poetry book that I would like to talk to you about, and that is Plum by Holly McNish. I have spoken about this a few times on the channel, but I don't think in quite a while. I did do a full video where myself and my friend Charlotte recommended a book to each other that was outside of our reading tastes. So she got me to read a Terry Pratchett book and I got her to read this. Like after we read them, we like shared our thoughts on it. So if you want to see that video, it is like a couple of years old now, but I will leave it linked if you want to check it out. Holly McNish is probably one of my favorite poets ever. I think her style is so fantastic. It's a very rhyme heavy style of poetry that lends itself fantastically to spoken word. So I would really recommend, you know, looking Holly McNish up on YouTube and seeing some performances of her work. This is a collection that explores growing up, but I think one of the things that is absolutely remarkable and really interesting about this book is that it is a mix of poems that Holly has written recently, but also interruptions from poems that she wrote in her younger days. And there's almost this kind of like dialogue between the Holly writing in the moment as an adult and her younger self. It's a collection all about the various stumbling blocks of growing up. And one of the things that I really love about Holly's poetry as well is how funny it is. I got this signed by Holly when I went to see her at Derby Book Festival. Getting books signed isn't something that particularly interests me anymore. I think it's one of the things that has lost the shine since I've started working in publishing, and I got this signed just before I started working in publishing, like only a couple of months before. So I think this is potentially the last book that I ever like enjoyed the experience of getting it signed and like queuing up to meet someone. And the final book I'm going to talk about is a collection of short stories, and that is The Complete Stories of Zora Neale Hurston. So in this collection there are stories written from like the 1920s up until like the 1950s. Zora Neale Hurston was a really prolific writer of the Harlem Renaissance, but for quite a while her work was largely forgotten. She was a novelist, a folklorist, an anthropologist. She's probably most well known for her novel Their Eyes Were Watching God, but I would also really recommend her short stories. Some of the most famous stories that are included in this were two of my favourites, The Gilded Six-Bits and Sweat. I studied this book at university in a 20th century American literature module, and this was definitely my favourite thing that we did on that module, probably because it was the only thing that wasn't by a straight white man. But one of the things that I really love about Zora Neale Hurston's writing is that the dialogue is really written in a vernacular, so it is written down as people would speak it in their accents, and I love that in storytelling. It is one of my absolute favourite things, and I think it's a real skill to be able to really absorb and listen to how people speak and be able to reflect that onto the page. If you've not read any Zora Neale Hurston before, I would really urge you to. She's just an absolutely fantastic writer. I have never read Their Eyes Were Watching God, but I would really love to because I have adored her short stories. There we have it. They are 5 purple book recommendations for you. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? If you want to find out more about any of these books, I will leave them linked down below in the description, as I always do. That's all I'm going to talk about today, but don't forget to leave me your favourite purple emoji down in the comments. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will speak to you in the next episode in this series.